3 men are dying in that ravine, and you're standing here counting my paperwork." Evelyn Carter didn't wait for Brooks to answer. She grabbed her rifle and walked out the door. Nobody stopped her. Nobody moved. 20 minutes later, 3 soldiers came out of that darkness alive because she went in anyway, unauthorized, alone, against direct orders in the middle of the night. And the man who'd told her she wouldn't last a week. He was still standing in that doorway. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. The helicopter didn't ease down, it dropped, hard and fast, the way everything in Kunar province happened, without warning, without ceremony, without the slightest concern for how anyone felt about it. The rotors chewed through the thin mountain air, and the whole frame shuddered like something angry. And Evelyn Carter gripped the cargo strap above her head with one hand, and her rifle case with the other, and she didn't close her eyes, not once. Not even when the landing skids hit the rocky ground so hard her teeth clicked together. She was the last one off. She always was. Not because she was slow, because she took 3 full seconds to look at everything before she moved. That was a habit she'd had since she was 9 years old, crouched in a deer blind in the hills outside Billings, Montana. Her father's hand on her shoulder, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "Don't move until you know exactly what you're stepping into, Evie. The land doesn't care how fast you are. It only cares how smart you are." She stepped off the helicopter, and the entire base went quiet. Not the respectful kind of quiet. Not the kind that meant people were paying attention out of courtesy. This was the kind of quiet that happens when something shows up that doesn't fit, when the brain registers a mismatch and the mouth forgets to keep moving. Evelyn had walked into that silence before. In training facilities, in briefing rooms, in the offices of men who looked at her file and then looked at her and then looked at her file again, like they were hoping the photo had changed. She was used to it. What she wasn't used to was the laugh. It came from somewhere to her left, short and sharp, the kind of laugh that isn't really about humor. She didn't turn her head toward it. She kept moving rifle case in her left hand pack on her back, sunglasses, catching the flat autumn light, and she walked the length of that landing pad the way she walked every space she entered, like she'd already mapped the exits. The man who laughed said something to the man beside him. She caught the tail end of it. "Won't last a week." She kept walking. Behind her, someone else, quieter, but not quiet enough, said, "Command must be desperate." Evelyn set her rifle case down on the ground beside the gear pile. She straightened. She looked up at the mountains surrounding the outpost on 3 sides, at the gray-brown peaks that didn't look like anything beautiful from down here, that looked instead like walls, like teeth, like something waiting. She'd read every report on this region before she boarded the transport. She knew the casualty numbers. She knew the ambush patterns, the elevation data, the estimated enemy positions on the northern and eastern ridges. She knew that this outpost had lost 2 snipers in the last 4 months. One to a PKM burst, one to a scope that gave away his position. She also knew that the men laughing at her right now had been here for all of it. She didn't hold that against them, not yet. Chatoy. Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. He was 6'2", built like someone had assembled him from spare parts meant for a larger person, and then compressed everything down. And he had a face that had stopped making unnecessary expressions sometime around his 3rd deployment. He stood outside the command post with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes doing all the things his voice wasn't doing, and when Evelyn approached him and said, "Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter reporting as assigned," he looked at her for a long moment before he responded. "I know who you are," he said. His voice was flat. Not hostile, not yet. Just flat, the way concrete is flat, offering nothing, giving nothing away. "Good," she said. "Then we can skip the introductions." Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't tell if it was respect or irritation. Probably both. In her experience, they felt the same to men like Brooks. They both landed in the same place in the chest, and they both made men like him do something they weren't expecting to do, which was recalibrate. He looked past her at the helicopter already lifting off again in a roar of displaced air and dust. "You came alone," he said. I work alone. I was told I'd have a spotter assigned here. You were told wrong, Brooks said. I'm assigning you Hayes. Corporal, he's competent. The way he said competent made it sound like a minimum requirement, like saying a truck had 4 wheels. I'll take competent, Evelyn said. Brooks finally looked directly at her, and she let him look, because she understood that this moment mattered, that men like Brooks conducted this entire conversation in the first 30 seconds and decided things that took months to undo. You'll bunk in Section C, he said. East End. Hayes will brief you on current threat assessment. Section C was where they stored equipment they weren't currently using. She'd figure that out in about 4 minutes. She nodded. And Carter, he said as she turned to go. She stopped, turned back. This isn't a proving ground, he said. I don't have time to babysit a showcase. Whatever they told you about this assignment, whatever they told you about how things work here, forget it. This is my unit, my rules. You perform, or you're gone. She looked at him for exactly as long as it took to make sure he knew she'd heard every word. Then she said, Yes, Sergeant, and walked away. Corporal Ethan Hayes was sitting on an overturned ammunition crate outside the Eastern Barracks, cleaning a pair of binoculars when she found him, and he looked up when she stopped in front of him, without the slightest shift in his expression, without the involuntary widening of the eyes that she'd seen on every other face in this compound. He just looked at her, clear dark eyes, maybe 24, 25. A stillness about him that she recognized because she had it too. The stillness of someone who spent a lot of time watching things, who had learned to exist quietly inside their own attention. Hayes, she said. That's me, he said. Carter. I'm told you're my spotter. I'm told the same thing. He set the binoculars down. You want me to show you your bunk? I already found it. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Section C. Nice storage space, she said. He put the last guy from Bragg in Section C too, Hayes said. Guy had 300 hours of confirmed surveillance and 2 combat jumps. Brooks put him in with the spare parts. What happened to him? He requested a transfer after 2 weeks. She looked at Hayes steadily. I'm not requesting a transfer. No, Hayes said, and this time the thing at the corner of his mouth was definitely something more than neutral. I don't think you are. He picked up the binoculars again, turned them over, examined the lens with the focused attention of someone who trusts nothing. He hasn't checked himself. I don't care where you're from, or how you got here, or what your file says. I've had spotters who looked great on paper and fell apart the first time somebody started shooting in our direction. That's fair, she said. I'm not looking for fair, Hayes said. I'm looking for someone who's going to be where they're supposed to be when everything goes sideways. Because out here, everything goes sideways. That's not a possibility. That's a schedule. She crossed her arms. I've been behind a rifle since I was 9 years old. I shot my first competition at 12. I qualified for the Army's Special Operations Sniper course at 26 and finished second in my class. I've had 2 prior deployments, one in Iraq and one in eastern Afghanistan, and I'm standing here instead of somewhere comfortable, which tells you something about what I choose to do with myself. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What does finishing second in your class tell me? It tells you I know exactly where I need to improve. He looked at her for another beat. Okay, he said, and stood up. Let me show you the current observation posts. The trouble started that night. She opened her rifle case to run the daily check. She always ran the same sequence of small, precise movements she'd been doing since her first deployment, and found the scope loose. Not just loose. The mounting screws had been backed out. Not enough to be obvious at a glance. Enough to make the first shot at any real distance go somewhere it shouldn't. She sat on her cot in Section C in the dark, with the smell of diesel and dust, and someone else's old coffee, and she held the scope in both hands and looked at it. This could have been transport. Things vibrate on helicopters. Things shake loose. She knew it wasn't transport. She got out her toolkit and spent the next hour remounting the scope and re-zeroing everything she could re-zero in a room with no range. She'd do the rest at first light. She worked by headlamp, and she didn't think about who had done it or why, because that conversation could happen later, and what mattered right now was that her equipment was ready. When she finally lay down, she was awake for a long time. She wasn't afraid. She was paying attention. She found Hayes at 5:30. The sky was the particular dark blue that comes before gray before actual dawn, the hour when the mountains showed only as shapes, and the outpost was mostly quiet except for the watch rotations and the distant pop of something far away that might have been weapons fire or might have been a rock shifting in the cold. "I need to re-zero," she said. Hayes looked at the scope on her rifle. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked. "Short range or full?" he said. "Full. I want to confirm at 500 before I trust it at 800. "We don't have a 500-meter lane here." "Then show me what you have." What they had was a makeshift range along the southern perimeter wall, scavenged targets at inconsistent distances used by the unit for basic proficiency checks, and not much else. It wasn't ideal. She made it work. Hayes watched her shoot 6 rounds through a grouping that made him go quiet in a different way than he'd been quiet before. "That's," he started. "I know," she said. "Now I know where it's hitting." "Where were you before this?" "2nd Ranger Battalion. Before that, JBER. "Why'd you volunteer for this?" She lowered the rifle and turned to look at him. The light was coming up now, gray and thin, catching the dust in the air. "Because they needed someone," she said. "And I can do it." He nodded. Not like he was performing acceptance, like he was actually arriving there. "There's a patrol going out at 0800, he said. "Team of 6 heading northeast toward the valley floor. There's been movement on the ridgeline above their route for 3 days. Command hasn't assigned a sniper element." "Why not?" His expression did something complicated. "Because the last request went through Brooks." She understood what he wasn't saying. "Can we get attached?" she said. "I can ask," Hayes said. "But even if the answer's yes, it'll come with a position assignment from Brooks. He decides where we set up. And he'll put us somewhere that doesn't help. He'll put us somewhere that doesn't embarrass him," Hayes said. "Which is almost the same thing." She was quiet for a moment, calculating. Looking at the ridge in her mind, running the angles, the elevation, the likely approach from the enemy's side. "Get me on that patrol," she said. "However you can."
Chetamisha.
Brooks approved the attachment. She found out later through Hayes that the approval had surprised people, that Brooks almost never attached sniper support to routine valley patrols, that he'd been fighting the concept since she arrived. But he approved this one. She thought about that. She thought about Section C, and the loose scope, and the way Brooks had looked at her when he said my rules. She thought about it, and then she set the thought down and focused on the ground in front of her. The patrol left at 0803. By 0817, she'd already identified 4 things wrong with the route. She didn't say anything. She watched. By 0830, she and Hayes were in position on a secondary ridgeline, 200 meters east of where Brooks's orders had placed them. They were there because Hayes, who knew these mountains better than he knew his own apartment, had read the terrain the same way she had, and suggested the deviation, and she'd agreed, and they'd moved without making a production out of it. 12 o'clock that outcropping, Hayes said. She was already there. She already had it. 3 figures. Moving lateral. Not hiking, not patrolling. Moving the way people move when they're waiting for something to happen. "I see them," she said. Her voice was level. Her breathing was level. Everything inside her was doing the thing it did when she got behind a rifle, that particular settling like water, finding its own surface. "Talk to me on the patrol's position." 200 meters from the ravine crossing. They're going to hit the open ground in about 4 minutes. 4 minutes was not a lot of time. One of the 3 figures on the outcropping shifted, and she caught the shape of what he was carrying and said, "PKM, he's setting up." "Can you what?" "Distance?" 780, maybe 790. She breathed in. Wind. Coming left maybe 3 miles an hour, gusting occasionally. She was doing the calculation while he talked. She was always doing the calculation. Her father had started her on ballistics before she understood algebra, had made her feel the numbers in her body, before she saw them on paper, had told her that a good shot isn't mathematics, it's a conversation with physics. She exhaled half a breath and held the rest. The patrol was moving toward the ravine. The man with the PKM was settling into his position. She put the crosshairs where the future was going to be and pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke once. 780 meters away, the man with the PKM went down, and the other two figures scattered, and Evelyn cycled the bolt and found one of them and made a decision in the half-second available to her and fired again. The patrol stopped, went to ground. She heard radio chatter cutting in. The third figure disappeared behind the rock face. "Let him go," Hayes said. "I know," she said. She was already tracking the ridgeline above for secondary positions, because that's how it worked, because one machine gun crew is never one machine gun crew. Nothing moved. She waited. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. "Patrol is calling all clear," Hayes said quietly. She stayed on the glass for another 30 seconds. Then she slowly lifted her eye from the scope and blinked at the flat morning light and breathed. 790, she said. "Maybe 800, Hayes said. He sounded like someone who was trying very hard to sound like nothing had just happened. "Re-zero confirmed," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And then something happened that she hadn't expected, which was that Corporal Ethan Hayes, who had the stillness of a man who'd seen everything, let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He lowered his own binoculars and looked at her with something that wasn't surprise anymore. "Okay." Nobody celebrated. That was the first thing she noticed when they returned to the outpost. The patrol leader, a lieutenant named Vasquez, found her near the gear cage and shook her hand and said, "Good work out there," with the directness of someone who meant it and nothing more. The other 5 members of the patrol nodded. One of them, a big, quiet specialist named Dobbins, stopped and looked at her for a moment with something she couldn't entirely name. "That was a 700-meter shot," he said. "790, Hayes said from behind her. Dobbins looked at Hayes, then back at her. Then he walked on without another word. What she heard from across the compound 20 minutes later was a different story. "Lucky shot," someone said. She couldn't see who. "Enemy probably wasn't even set up," someone else said. "Probably just in position." Could have been coincidence. 2 shots, 1 hit. She was sitting on her cot in Section C, going through her maintenance kit. She kept going through her maintenance kit. Hayes came by an hour later and stood in the doorway. "They're saying it was luck," he said. "I know. It wasn't luck. I know that too." She looked up at him. "It doesn't matter what they say today." He leaned against the doorframe. "Why not?" "Because tomorrow there'll be another patrol," she said, "and the day after another one. And eventually, there are enough days that the word luck stops fitting." She went back to the cleaning rod. "My father told me something when I was young. He said people will call it luck until they run out of the word. After that, they have to use a different one." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "What's the different word?" he said. "Depends on the person," she said. "Some of them call it skill. Some call it talent. Some just look at you differently and don't use a word at all." She ran the cloth through the barrel. "Brooks isn't going to call it either," Hayes said. "No," she agreed. "He won't." He told Vasquez the shot was within acceptable parameters for a sniper asset. He put it in the report as a standard engagement. She set down the cleaning rod. "He didn't mention the distance," she said. "He mentioned a distance of 450 meters. The number sat there in the air between them. 450 meters was a perfectly good shot. For most snipers, it was a solid engagement. It was competent. It was unmemorable. It was exactly the kind of number you put in a report when you wanted a person's performance to sound like nothing special. Evelyn picked the cleaning rod back up. "Make sure you keep your own log," she said. "Every engagement, distance conditions result, your notes." Hayes nodded. He understood what she was saying. "He's going to do it again," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. "Probably," she said. "Which means we do what we do, and we keep a record of the truth, and we don't spend any energy being angry about it." "You're not angry." She thought about that honestly. "I'm something," she said. "But angry takes too much attention, and out here, attention is the most valuable thing I have." 6 days later, someone went into her kit and replaced the documented dope card in her data book, the carefully compiled record of ballistic drop data she'd built up over years of shooting, with a blank one. The data book was locked. It was always locked. She didn't know how they'd gotten into it. She sat with the blank card in her hands for a long moment. Then she got a pen and started reconstructing from memory, writing small and precise in the margins of the blank card, pulling the numbers from the place in her brain where she kept things that mattered. It took 2 hours. She didn't tell Hayes. She told him about the scope. She didn't tell him about this, because the scope could have been transport, and she'd been willing to let it stay ambiguous. But 2 incidents in 6 days meant something, and she didn't want Hayes carrying the weight of knowing exactly how targeted this was until she had a clearer picture of who was doing it. She protected him the same way she protected everyone she worked with, by knowing more than she let on. That night, she wrote a letter to her brother Marcus back in Billings, who was 22, and working on their father's ranch, and who had never once in his life told her she couldn't do something. She wrote him a long letter about the mountains, about the quality of the light in the mornings, about the way the cold came down from the peaks in the evenings and settled into the valleys like something patient and permanent. She didn't write about the scope. She didn't write about the data card. She wrote, "I think about Dad a lot out here. I think about those mornings in the blind when he'd make us wait until everything was right before he'd let me even raise the rifle. He said patience was the most important skill, and I didn't believe him for years. Now I think he might have been the smartest person I ever knew." She sealed the letter. She looked at the ceiling of Section C for a while. Then she got up and went to check her equipment again, because that was the only answer she had for any of it, and it was enough. 10 days after she arrived, Master Sergeant Brooks called her into the command post for what he described as a performance evaluation. She sat across a table from him in a room that smelled like map paper and electronics, and he laid a folder on the table between them and opened it and looked at it with an expression of careful neutrality. "Your engagement log shows 3 confirmed kills in your first week," he said. "That's correct," she said. He turned a page. "All at ranges under 500 meters. She looked at the folder. She looked at his face. "The second engagement was at 780 to 800 meters, she said. Her voice was very level. "Both rounds documented by my spotter." "Spotter documentation isn't always reliable," Brooks said. "Adrenaline stress, it affects distance perception." "Hayes is not an unreliable spotter," she said. "I'm not saying he's unreliable. I'm saying the documentation is subject to the conditions of the engagement." He closed the folder. "The point of this evaluation isn't to dispute particulars. The point is to assess whether your integration into this unit is proceeding appropriately." She waited. "You deviated from your assigned position during the Valley Patrol," he said. There it was. "The assigned position gave us no line of sight to the threat," she said. "Hayes and I relocated to establish a viable firing solution. The deviation was tactically necessary. The deviation was unauthorized. The engagement was successful." "That's not the point, Carter. With respect, Sergeant, if the assignment puts the patrol at risk, and I can see a way to protect them, then the deviation is not only justified, it's required." Brooks looked at her steadily for a long moment. "I'll be watching your positioning on every subsequent mission," he said. "Any further unauthorized deviations will result in a formal incident report." She nodded. She stood. "Carter," he said, as she reached the door. She stopped. "I want you to understand something," he said. "Whatever you think you proved on that patrol, this unit was functioning before you arrived. It will continue to function the way I decide it functions. Your job here is to fit into that, not to redefine it." She turned to look at him, and she said something she'd been sitting with since she first stepped off that helicopter. Something she said not out of anger, but out of the quiet certainty that had been building in her since she was 9 years old, and first learned that some truths take patience. "Sergeant," she said, "I'm not here to redefine your unit. I'm here to make sure everyone in it comes home." She paused. "That's the only job I've ever had." She walked out. Behind her, the silence in that room felt different than the one that had greeted her on the landing pad. This one was thinking. That night, a fire team got pinned down in a ravine 2 kilometers east. It was a night operation, bad planning, worse luck, and by the time the radio traffic started coming in, it was already a search and rescue situation. 3 men in a ravine with limited ammunition and an enemy element working the high ground above them. Evelyn was dressed and moving before the second transmission finished. Hayes was already outside. He had his gear. He looked at her and didn't say anything, and they went. They were not authorized to go. They went anyway. She set up in the dark on a ridgeline that gave her a sightline into the ravine, and she shot 3 times in 18 minutes, and the fire team came out, all 3 of them, and one of them was carrying another one who'd taken a round in the shoulder but was alive and would stay that way. When they got back to the outpost, Brooks was standing in the command post entrance. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said a word. She went to Section C and sat on her cot and pressed her hands flat on her knees because they were shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the particular aftermath of an operation in the dark. When everything has just been very serious and is now suddenly less serious, and the body has to process that difference. She'd done what she could do. She'd done what she was here to do. 3 men were alive who might not have been. She sat in Section C with the smell of diesel and the sound of wind off the mountains, and she thought about her father, and she thought about patience, and she pressed her hands flat against her knees until they stopped shaking. Then she got out a clean piece of paper and started writing to Marcus. "Things are fine," she wrote. "The mountains here remind me of home, if home were larger and less forgiving. I met someone today who I think is going to matter. Most people here are trying. A few are afraid of the wrong things." She thought for a moment. "I'm okay," she wrote. "Don't worry. I know how to do this." And the strange thing, the true thing was that every word of that was accurate. She was okay. She knew how to do this. And whatever was coming next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything in her life, steadily, precisely, and without flinching. The mountains outside didn't care about any of that. But she wasn't shooting at the mountains. The formal incident report landed on Evelyn's cot the next morning. She found it when she came back from her pre-dawn equipment check, a single sheet of paper folded in half, placed precisely in the center of her pillow. She picked it up and read it standing still in her jacket, still with the cold of the mountains on her skin. Unauthorized deployment. Deviation from assigned operational parameters. Formal notation pending review. She folded it back in half and set it on the shelf above her cot next to her data book. Then she went to find Hayes. He was already up, already outside, sitting on the same overturned crate with his binoculars watching the eastern ridge. The way he watched it every morning, like a conversation he was having with the mountain, and the mountain was doing most of the talking. "He filed it," she said. Hayes didn't look up from the ridge. "I know. He told Vasquez this morning, made sure I heard." "What did Vasquez say?" "Nothing he could say on record." Hayes lowered the binoculars. "Off record, he told me those 3 guys from last night are calling you by name this morning. First time I've heard soldiers in this unit use a sniper's name like that." She sat down on the ground beside the crate, back against the wall rifle across her knees. "It won't matter to Brooks," she said. "No," Hayes agreed. "But it matters to them." She looked at the ridge. The light was coming up cold and thin, and the shadows were still long across the valley floor. "How many patrols this week?" she said. "3 confirmed. 1 possible 4th if the intelligence on the northern approach holds." "Are we attached to any of them?" Hayes paused, just long enough to mean something. "We're attached to the 4th, he said. "If it happens. Brooks hasn't confirmed the others." She understood immediately. 3 patrols going out without sniper coverage because Brooks was more invested in making a point than in protecting his people. She pressed her jaw together and held that thought for a moment, and then let it go, because anger at Brooks cost her attention, and attention was the currency she couldn't afford to spend carelessly. "What's the terrain on the 4th?" she said. Hayes picked the binoculars back up and started talking. They planned for 2 hours. That was the morning of the day everything started to change. The first patrol went out at 700 without them. It came back at 1140 with 2 wounded. Not critical, but wounded. Evelyn was doing equipment maintenance when they came through the gate, and she watched Dobbins, the big quiet specialist from the Valley Patrol, help one of the wounded men through the medical bay entrance. And she watched his face while he did it, and she saw the thing in his expression that she recognized, because she'd seen it on soldiers' faces before. The specific look of someone who is trying to figure out if things could have gone differently. He caught her eye across the compound. She didn't say anything. He looked away. She went back to her equipment. The second patrol came back clean. The third lost radio contact for 40 minutes in the middle of a valley crossing and came back intact, but shaken 3 men who moved like they were still listening for something. By the end of that week, a pattern was establishing itself that didn't require anyone to announce it. Patrols with Evelyn came back whole. Patrols without her came back with problems. Nobody said this out loud. Nobody posted it on the board or put it in a briefing. But in the way that information travels in small enclosed spaces among people who depend on each other to stay alive, it moved. She felt it in the way men looked at her when she crossed the compound. Not the laugh anymore. Not the silence of mismatch. Something different. Something still wary. Still cautious. Still not ready to be named, but different. Hayes felt it too. "Vasquez requested you by name for the northern approach," he told her on day 9. "Formal request went through channels." "What did Brooks do with it?" "He approved it." She looked up from the data book where she was logging the week's engagements. "He approved it," she repeated. "I know," Hayes said. "I'm still figuring out what that means." She thought about it. Brooks didn't do things without a reason. He didn't approve requests that benefited her because he'd suddenly decided she was valuable. There was a calculation in it somewhere. He approved it because if Vasquez's patrol goes wrong without sniper support, and Vasquez already filed a formal request, it becomes a paperwork problem for Brooks, she said slowly. But if we go and something happens to the patrol anyway, he has documentation that he responded to the request. Hayes was very still for a moment. "So either way he's covered," Hayes said. "Either way he's covered," she agreed. She looked at the data book. "We're going," she said. "I know," Hayes said. "I'll have the grid coordinates ready by 0500. The Northern Approach mission was the one that changed her kill count from 3 to 12 in a single operation. She didn't plan it that way. Nobody ever plans it that way. What happened was that the intelligence underestimated the size of the enemy element by about 400%, and what was supposed to be a reconnaissance patrol to assess a suspected weapons cache turned into a running engagement across 700 meters of broken terrain, and Evelyn and Hayes were the reason 12 soldiers made it out instead of none. She shot from 3 different positions that afternoon, moving each time, before the enemy could triangulate Hayes, talking in her ear the whole time, calling wind, calling distance, calling the positions of the patrol, so she knew exactly where to put her rounds and exactly where not to. 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. Each number was a decision. Each decision took less than a second and cost something she didn't have a word for yet. When it was over and the patrol was back behind the perimeter, and the adrenaline was cycling down, and her hands had done the thing they did, where they shook just slightly, just barely, just enough that she noticed Hayes sat beside her in the dirt and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, 11 engagements in 4 hours. 12, she said. 12 confirmed kills. She nodded. You okay? He said. She thought about the honest answer to that question. I will be, she said. Give me an hour. He gave her the hour. She spent it in Section C, writing a letter to Marcus that she didn't finish, because halfway through she ran out of words for what she was trying to say, which was something about the weight of it, about the way each trigger pull was simultaneously the smallest and largest thing she'd ever done, about how she understood now why her father had always been quiet, after hunting season quiet, in a way she'd mistaken for tiredness when she was young, and understood now was something else entirely. She folded the unfinished letter and put it in her jacket pocket. She went back outside. Life on the outpost continued, and the number 12 became the number that people started saying when they talked about her the way they'd said 790 before, except now there was no one calling it luck, because you couldn't say luck 12 times. You had to find a different word. Most of them hadn't found it yet, but they were looking. The one exception was Brooks. Brooks looked at her across the compound the morning after the northern approach and said nothing. The way a locked door says nothing, not with emptiness, but with intention. She met his eyes and moved on and didn't spend a second on it. But Hayes had been watching. He didn't file another incident report. Hayes said that evening. I noticed. He's changed tactics, Hayes said. He's not going after you on paper anymore. What's he going after? Hayes hesitated. In the months she'd known him, she had learned that Hayes only hesitated when he was deciding whether to protect her from something or give her information that would hurt. He usually chose information. She respected him for it. He's talking to people, Hayes said. One-on-one, quiet. The way he talks when he wants something to spread without being traced back to him. What's he saying? That you're reckless. That the northern approach casualties could have been avoided if you hadn't drawn fire with your third position move. That you cost the patrol 2 extra engagements by. The third position move is what kept their eastern flank covered when the secondary element came around, she said. If I'd stayed in position 2, that flank was open. I know that, Hayes said. I was there. But he's not telling them that part. No, Hayes said. He's not telling them that part. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about her father again. About a specific morning early frost on the ground, the two of them walking out to the blind in the dark, and her father saying something she'd carried with her ever since. Evie, some men are going to tell other men things about you before you ever get the chance to prove them wrong. The only answer for that is to keep doing the work. Truth is slow, but it's stubborn. It'll outlast almost everything. Keep logging, she told Hayes. Every engagement, he confirmed. Every single one. She looked at the mountains. Next patrol request that comes through, she said. There's one from Sergeant Reyes, South Valley, day after tomorrow. Are we on it? Not yet. Get us on it. Hayes got them on it. The South Valley Patrol was where the enemy first started calling her something on their radio frequencies. Hayes caught it during a scan between engagements, a burst of Pashto that he translated haltingly in real time while she was still on the glass. They're saying, he started. Wait. A pause. They're using a phrase, Kuchai Spojmai. What does that mean? Shadow moon, Hayes said. Or, another pause, the moon that watches. Something like that. It's not a perfect translation. She fired twice, cycled the bolt. They're talking about you, Hayes said, and his voice had changed slightly the way voices change when something unexpected arrives. They're telling their people to relocate. They're saying the shadow moon is in position. She kept her eye on the glass. Good, she said. Let them relocate. But the next day, the phrase came back through intelligence channels in a different form. A different unit. A different frequency, a different section of the valley. Same phrase. And then 2 days later, a third instance intercepted communications describing a female sniper whose position couldn't be confirmed, whose shots came from directions that didn't match expected angles. The intelligence officer, a captain named Okafor, brought the transcripts to Hayes. "Your sniper is making them nervous," Okafor said. "That's not nothing, that's actually significant." "Tell Brooks," Hayes said. Okafor's expression shifted. "Brooks has already seen the transcripts." "What did he say?" "He said it was probably referring to a male sniper they'd misidentified by radio." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "He said the phrase probably didn't have a gender connotation in the original language." Hayes looked at the transcripts. Hayes had served 2 prior deployments in Afghanistan. He spoke conversational Dari and functional Pashto. He knew exactly what gender connotation the phrase had in the original language. He didn't argue with Okafor. He waited until the captain left, and then he walked to Section C and told Evelyn everything, and she listened to all of it, including the part about Brooks, and when Hayes finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How many patrols have they rescheduled in the last 2 weeks because of enemy movement that intelligence couldn't explain?" Hayes thought about it. 3, maybe 4. "Enemy elements repositioning," she said. "Pulling back from known observation points, changing their timing." "Because they don't know where you are," Hayes said slowly. "Because they don't know where I am," she agreed. "Which means every patrol that goes out right now is moving through terrain that the enemy is actively avoiding." Hayes stared at her. "You're changing their pattern," he said, "just by being here." "Every sniper changes the pattern," she said. "That's the job." "Not like this," Hayes said. "I've worked with 7 snipers over 3 deployments. I've never seen this." He paused. "They're afraid of you." She looked at him steadily. "Then we make sure they stay afraid," she said. The kill count climbed. 17, 23, 27. Each number came with its own story, its own set of seconds that would stay with her longer than she wanted them to. The day she covered a medevac extraction and kept a landing zone clear for 11 minutes straight, while a helicopter with a wounded pilot tried 3 approaches before the 4th one held. The night she and Hayes were attached to an engineer unit clearing a road of IEDs, and she spotted a spotter before he could relay their position to a mortar team and took him at 620 meters in failing light. The afternoon she covered a trapped 2-man fire team for 90 minutes until a QRF could reach them firing 17 rounds in that time, each one placed, each one deliberate. She never talked about the numbers. Hayes kept the log. She kept the letters to Marcus, kept writing even when she didn't know what she was trying to say, kept describing the mountains and the light and the cold and the small details that seemed important in ways she couldn't explain, the sound of the wind at night, the particular quiet after an engagement when everyone was still and listening, the way the soldiers who'd come back from a patrol looked at the gate when they came through it, like they were only half believing they'd made it. She wrote about Hayes too. "He's the best spotter I've ever worked with," she wrote, "and I don't think he knows that. He anticipates before I have to ask. He tracks 6 things simultaneously and tells me the 3 I need to know. And when everything goes wrong, and it always goes wrong, he doesn't freeze, and he doesn't talk too much, and he doesn't lose the fundamentals. He just keeps doing the job. Those people are rare. You have to hold on to them." Marcus wrote back. His letters came in batches, 3 or 4 at a time, weeks delayed paper, slightly worn from handling. He wrote about the ranch, about the horses, about the particular stubbornness of autumn in Montana, when it couldn't decide whether to be summer or winter, and kept trying both. He wrote, "Dad would be so proud. He used to tell me your sister is the best shot I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of shots. He never said that to you because he was afraid of what you'd think, but he said it to me 100 times. She read that letter 4 times. She folded it into her jacket pocket with the unfinished letter she'd been carrying for weeks. Then she went back to work. The breaking point with Brooks came on a Thursday. She knew it was Thursday because Marcus had written in his last letter that it was a Thursday when their father had first taken her out to the blind, and she'd been thinking about that. And the coincidence felt like the kind of thing her father would have called meaningful. And she would have called mathematics. And they both would have been right. She and Hayes came back from a 6-hour observation post-shift to find their next mission folder had been updated. New grid coordinates for their primary position. New elevation data. New approach route. Hayes spread the folder on the ammunition crate, and they both looked at it. Evelyn looked at the new primary position for a long time. "This is wrong," she said. "The coordinates place us. I know where they place us." She traced the topographic markings with one finger, reading the terrain the way her father had taught her to read it, not as lines on paper, but as physical reality, as the actual shape of ground and slope and shadow. "This position has zero line of sight to the patrol route. We'd be looking at a ridge face. We couldn't cover anything moving through the valley." Hayes was already running the same calculation. "He knows that," Hayes said quietly. She looked at him. "He has to know that," Hayes said. "He's been running operations in this area for 8 months. He knows every observation point in a 5-kilometer radius." The thing that Hayes was saying without saying it settled into the air between them. Brooks hadn't made a mistake. Brooks had read the terrain correctly and placed them on the wrong side of it deliberately. She closed the folder. "What's the patrol?" she said. "Vasquez again. 7 men. Intel suggests possible enemy command element moving through the southern valley. If the intelligence is right, then Vasquez needs coverage," she said. "Not from that position. If we deviate again." "I know," she said. She picked up her rifle case. "We deviate again," she said. Hayes didn't argue. They went out at 04:30 the next morning, and they were not where the folder said they would be. And when the patrol hit contact at 0917 in the Southern Valley, Evelyn was in a position that gave her clean sight lines to every approach angle, and she kept Vasquez's team moving and alive through 40 minutes of a running engagement that covered 400 meters of broken ground. Confirmed kills 4, patrol losses none. When they came back through the gate, Vasquez was behind her, and he put a hand briefly on her shoulder as she passed him, and he said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." She nodded once and kept walking. Behind her, she heard him stop. She heard him look at something. She heard him say very quietly to whoever was standing near the command post entrance, "Whatever you think of her, those 7 men behind me are alive." She didn't turn around. She didn't need to see Brooks's face. She walked to Section C and set down her rifle case and sat on her cot and pressed her palms flat on her knees and breathed. 27. That was the number now. 27. She thought about each one of them, which she always did, which she had promised herself she would always do, because the day it stopped feeling like something was the day she'd need to stop. She thought about them in order in the sequence they'd happened, and she let each one be real, and then she let it go. It took a long time. When she was done, she picked up a pen and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "Marcus," she wrote, "I'm okay. Don't worry. The mountains are still here." She thought about what to say next. From somewhere across the compound, she heard laughter. Real laughter. The kind that happens when people are relieved, when something has just been less terrible than it might have been. She heard Dobbins's voice in the middle of it, that big, low rumble she'd come to recognize, and a couple of other voices she was starting to know. She listened to it for a moment. "Something is shifting here," she wrote. "I can feel it. People are starting to—" She stopped. She thought about the right word. "People are starting to look differently," she wrote. "Not at me exactly. At what's possible. At what they'd decided couldn't be done. And I think that matters more than any of the rest of it." She sealed the letter. She thought about Brooks. She thought about the mission folder with the wrong coordinates. She thought about the incident reports and the scope and the data card and the unofficial conversations Brooks was having with men in corners. He was escalating. She could feel it. Each step had been slightly larger than the last, slightly more direct, slightly more willing to put the patrol at risk to make his point. She didn't know where the escalation ended. She didn't know what he was capable of when he decided that subtlety wasn't working. But she knew this, whatever came next, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else here. She would be ready. She would stay in her fundamentals. And she would not under any circumstances give him the thing he was actually after, which was not her failure, but her response to the attempt. He wanted her angry. He wanted her to do something that justified the story he was telling about her, the story about recklessness and insubordination and not belonging. She would not give him that story. She would give him only the truth, which was that she was very good at this, and she was getting better. And every morning she woke up and did the work, and kept her people alive, and went back to bed and woke up and did it again. That was not a story that fit the word reckless. That was not a story that fit the word lucky. She was still working on what word it did fit. But somewhere across the compound, for the first time since she'd landed, the soldiers who had laughed were laughing again. And this time, she understood they weren't laughing at her. They were laughing because they were alive. And out here, that was the only word that mattered. The kill count sat at 27. It would not stay there long. Brooks was planning something. She didn't know what yet, but she could feel it the same way. She could feel a wind shift through a scope, that subtle pressure change before everything moves, and she was already adjusting. The intelligence report came in on a Tuesday. Evelyn knew it was significant before anyone told her, because the energy in the command post changed the particular shift that happens when information arrives that's larger than the usual traffic, when people start moving with slightly more purpose and slightly less conversation. She felt it from across the compound, and she waited because she'd learned that in this place, news found you whether you went looking for it or not. Captain Okafor found her first. He came to Section C at 1400, knocked on the doorframe even though there was no door, and stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at her with an expression that was trying to stay neutral and not entirely succeeding. "There's a briefing at 1600, he said. "You need to be there." "What's the target?" she said. He paused just long enough to tell her it was significant. "Farid Rahman." She set down the cleaning rod. Farid Rahman. She knew the name. Everyone in Kunar province who'd been paying attention knew the name. A commander who'd been operating in the eastern valleys for 3 years, who'd coordinated attacks on 4 different outposts, who was believed to be responsible for the deaths of 11 American soldiers, and somewhere between 40 and 60 Afghan civilians. He wasn't the kind of target that appeared in briefings often. He was the kind of target that appeared once, if at all, and then either vanished back into the mountains or was gone for good. "What's the intelligence confidence level?" she said. "High," Okafor said. "Higher than anything we've had on him in 2 years." She looked at him steadily. "And Brooks," she said. Something moved across Okafor's face. "The briefing is at 1600, he said again, and left. She sat for a moment with the cleaning rod in her hand. Then she picked up her data book and started reviewing everything she had on the eastern mountain approaches. The briefing room held 12 people, and too much tension for the space. Brooks stood at the front with a map behind him, and his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing it did when he was performing neutrality, performing it carefully because something underneath was working very hard. Evelyn sat in the second row next to Hayes, who had his notebook open and his pen moving before Brooks said the first word. The intelligence was specific. Farid Rahman would be moving through a mountain compound 17 kilometers northeast in a window of approximately 6 hours, beginning at 0300 the following night. The compound sat on a ridge at 2,400 meters elevation. The approach was through 2 narrow valleys. The target window was narrow. The terrain was brutal, and the margin for error was essentially 0. "Sniper element will be designated as primary engagement asset," Brooks said. He said it the way he said everything in briefings, flat procedural, giving nothing away about the calculation running underneath. "Carter and Hayes, your primary. Vasquez's team provides perimeter support." The room shifted slightly. Not much. Just enough. Evelyn watched Brooks's face while he said it, and she saw the thing she'd been looking for, not in what he showed, but in what he didn't show. No frustration, no reluctance. He'd assigned her this mission without resistance, which meant he wanted her on it. That told her everything. She kept her face still. "Questions," Brooks said. Hayes's hand went up. "What's the extraction window if the approach is compromised?" Vasquez's team holds the secondary extraction point at grid reference. Brooks read off a coordinate. Hayes wrote it down. Evelyn looked at the map and did not write it down because she'd already run the geometry in her head, and the secondary extraction point was in a position that would require crossing 400 meters of open ground to reach it if the primary approach went wrong. She raised her hand. "What's the radio relay plan if we lose comms in the valley crossing?" she said. "Standard protocol," Brooks said. "You relay through Vasquez. Vasquez will be 2 kilometers south of our position at primary engagement. If we're in the valley, we lose line of sight for radio relay." "Then you use the emergency frequency," Brooks said. "The emergency frequency in that valley has a 30% successful relay rate," she said. "Okafor's intel brief from 2 weeks ago documented it." A small silence. Brooks looked at her with his neutral face. "Then you make sure you don't need the emergency frequency," he said. She held his eyes for exactly 1 second. "Yes, Sergeant," she said. The briefing ended. Hayes walked beside her back across the compound and waited until they were clear of anyone else before he spoke. "He didn't answer the question," Hayes said. "No," she said. "He didn't. The comms gap in that valley is real. I've tried to raise the base from that grid before. It doesn't work." "I know. So if something goes wrong in the approach, we're on our own," she said, "until we're not." She stopped walking, turned to look at him directly. "Are you telling me you don't want to go?" Hayes met her eyes without flinching. "I'm telling you what I know," he said. "I'm going. I just want us both to be clear about what we're walking into." She looked at him. This man who'd said on the day they met, "I don't care who you are, only whether you can save us." This man who'd logged every distance, every condition, every result quietly, and without being asked, building the record of truth that Brooks was trying to erase. This man who'd moved with her to every position she'd needed in the dark and in the cold and under fire without hesitation. "I'm clear," she said. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. "Then let's get our gear ready." They had 14 hours. She spent the first 4 on equipment. Every piece of her kit went through her hands twice. The scope re-zeroed, mounts torqued to specification settings verified. Ammunition counted, inspected, loaded in the order she'd use it. Radio tested on every frequency, battery capacity confirmed. She did all of it slowly, which was how she did it when it mattered most, because speed in preparation was the enemy of certainty. Hayes did the same across from her without speaking. And the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind that 2 people build over weeks of doing serious things together. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. Around hour 5, Hayes said without looking up from his kit, "What's your read on the intelligence confidence?" She thought about it honestly. "The specificity is either very good or very wrong," she said. "Intel that precise on a target like Rahman either means excellent source access or it means someone fed it to us." Hayes went still. "You think it might be bad intelligence?" he said. "I think it might be designed intelligence," she said carefully. "There's a difference." He looked at her now. "Designed by who?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe nobody. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Okafor's sources are exactly what he thinks they are, and Rahman is exactly where they say he is." She picked up the next round and inspected the casing. "But I've been thinking about the comms gap." "Go on," Hayes said. "Brooks knows about the comms gap. You said you've tried to raise the base from that grid before. That means other people have tried. Brooks runs operations in this area, he knows. So he knows if something goes wrong in the approach, we can't call for help," Hayes said slowly. "And if the intelligence is wrong, we walk into whatever's actually there." Hayes finished. He set down his own kit. "Evelyn." She looked at him. He almost never used her first name. "If you think this is a setup, I think we do the job," she said. "I think we go in with our eyes open, and we trust our training, and we don't assume the worst until the worst shows up." She held his gaze. But I want you to know what I know, because you deserve to make your own decision. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. I already made my decision, he said. I made it the day they told me to report to the landing pad. He picked up his kit again. I'm just glad you told me. She nodded once. They kept working. At hour 9, she found the letter from Marcus she'd been carrying and finished it. She wrote, "Tomorrow is a big one. I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side, but I know who I'm walking in with, and that matters more than I can explain. Tell the horses hello. Tell Montana to stay put." She sealed it and put it with her gear. If she came back, she'd send it. If she didn't, Hayes knew it was there. They moved out at 01:30. The first 2 kilometers were clean. She moved the way she always moved, in darkness, steadily reading the ground through her boots, letting her eyes use the ambient light without forcing them, breathing evenly. Hayes was 2 steps behind her on the right, close enough that she could hear him far enough that a single burst of fire couldn't take them both. The valley crossing started at 02:15. It was at 02:17 that she knew. She didn't hear anything. She felt the change in the quality of the silence, the specific absence of sound that isn't natural quiet, but is instead the sound of things holding their breath. Animals, air, everything. She stopped walking. Hayes stopped 1 step later. She didn't use the radio. She turned her head slightly toward him and made the signal with 2 fingers that meant multiple elevated positions, and saw him receive it and nod and begin a slow scan. She was already scanning. There were at least 8, possibly more, positioned on both valley walls, overlapping fields of fire set up to catch anyone moving through the valley floor in a crossfire that had no exit. This was not a reaction to their movement. This was prepared. This was waiting. Her mind moved very fast through the geometry of what was in front of her. They had not been heard. Not yet. The enemy was holding position, which meant they were waiting for a signal, or a timing trigger, which meant she had seconds, maybe 30, maybe 60, before whatever initiated the ambush happened. She looked at the closest elevated position to her left and made a decision. She moved left and up, not the planned route, not the extraction point. Into the rocks on the north wall, climbing without rushing, because rushing makes noise, and noise ends everything. Hayes was behind her, reading her movement, adapting without needing an explanation, because they'd been doing this long enough that her body language was a language he spoke. They were 8 meters up the north wall when the first mortar round hit the valley floor, right where they'd been standing. The concussion hit her like a flat hand against the entire side of her body. Rock and dirt rained around them. She pressed herself into the wall and held completely still and let the noise go past, and then she was already moving again higher, because higher was the only direction that made any sense. The radio was useless. She knew it. They were in the comms gap. She didn't try. Hayes pressed close beside her and said into her ear so quietly it was barely air. 8 to 10 positions. I count 4 on the south wall, 3 on the north upper and lower. Possible command position east. She was already calculating angles. The north wall positions, she said, equally quiet. Take them first. If we don't clear the north wall, we can't move east. Agreed. First position is 60 meters above us and 30 east. She looked, found it. I have it, she said. What followed was 40 minutes that she would spend the rest of her life not being able to fully describe. Not because she couldn't remember. She remembered everything the way she always remembered everything, in an engagement with the particular clarity of a mind running at absolute capacity. But because what happened in those 40 minutes was not the clean, sequential thing that it sounded like in after-action reports. It was simultaneous and overlapping, and constantly changing a conversation between her rifle and the hillside that required her to be 3 things at once: the shooter, the mover, and the calculator, who was always running 2 steps ahead of the current position. She took the first north wall position at 0231. She and Hayes moved 40 meters east before the return fire found where she'd been. She took the second at 0238 from a position below, and left of it an angle she'd chosen because it was the one the enemy wouldn't expect from someone moving uphill under fire. The mortar team stopped firing after the third round because she'd put 2 rounds into their position, and they'd either gone down or gone back, and either outcome meant the same thing for her immediate problem. Hayes was calling everything: distance, movement, the positions of 3 men on the south wall who'd shifted when the north wall stopped responding, now trying to establish a new line on her. She moved before they found her. She fired twice into the closest south wall position. Then she was moving again. Hayes right with her, and the radio in her kit made a burst of static that told her they were crossing the edge of the comms gap, getting somewhere the signal might work, and Hayes grabbed it and started transmitting without being told. "This is Hayes, Oscar Lima 7. We are under contact in the Valley Approach Grid reference, static." He transmitted again. The 4th position on the north wall opened up, and she turned and put a round into it from a standing position braced against a rock face, and it was not a textbook shot, and it didn't need to be. It needed to work, and it worked. "Oscar Lima 7 receiving, say again your position." Hayes gave it. She was already moving east because east was where the command position was, and the command position was where Farid Rahman was supposed to be if he was here, if the intelligence was real, if this wasn't what she thought it was. She hit the East Ridge position at 0249 and found it empty. Not abandoned in a hurry. Empty in the way a position is empty when it was never occupied by the person you were looking for. The firing marks were there. Someone had been here. Multiple shooters. But the specific indicators of a command presence, the communications equipment, the personal security detail, positions, the layout that intelligence had described, none of it matched. She stood in the empty position and understood. Rahman had never been here. This had been an ambush built around false intelligence, designed to bring a sniper team into a kill zone in a valley with no comms, no extraction, and no support. She turned that knowledge over once in her mind, and then she set it down. Because understanding it didn't change what was immediately in front of her, which was that there were still active positions on the south wall, and Hayes had partial comms, and they needed to clear the valley well enough to move. She went back to work. By 0310, the south wall had gone quiet. By 0322, Hayes had established solid comms with the base, and a QRF was moving. By 0341, she and Hayes were holding a position on the East Ridge, and she was scanning the valley for anything still moving and finding nothing. She lowered the rifle. Her breathing was the only sound she could hear that was close. "QRF is 20 minutes out," Hayes said. He sounded like himself, which was remarkable. Steady, functional, doing the job. She thought about what that kind of steadiness cost and made a note to tell him someday. "Casualties," she said. "None on our side." He paused. "Confirmed." She breathed. "Rahman wasn't here," she said. "I know," Hayes said. "I saw the position." She looked out at the valley, at the darkness, at the specific absence of Farid Rahman in a location where intelligence had said with high confidence he would be. "Someone told them we were coming," she said. Hayes was quiet for a moment. She turned to look at him. The QRF was still 19 minutes out, and there was nothing to do right now except wait, and the valley was quiet, and the night was very large around them. "When did you figure it out?" Hayes said. "The briefing," she said. "The comms gap." Brooks didn't answer the question. "You knew before we left." "I suspected," she said. "There's a difference." She looked back at the valley. "I hoped I was wrong." Hayes said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Evelyn, if someone leaked the operation, if someone told the enemy we were coming tonight, that we'd be in this valley, then someone tried to kill us," she said. Flat, clear. Stating the fact the way facts deserve to be stated. Hayes sat with that. "He couldn't do it with paperwork," Hayes said slowly. "He couldn't do it by reassigning you. He couldn't do it by talking to people. He couldn't do it with bad coordinates." He stopped. "So he—" "Stop," she said. He stopped. "We don't have evidence," she said. "We have a theory. And right now, with a QRF 19 minutes out and an after-action report that's going to be scrutinized by people above Brooks." I need us to be precise about what we know and what we're inferring. Hayes looked at her. You're protecting the process, he said. I'm protecting us, she said, because if we go back and say Brooks leaked the operation and we can't prove it, he buries us. We look like we're making excuses for missing the target. She paused. We didn't miss the target. The target was never here. Those are two different things, and I need the after action to make that distinction clearly. And then, Hayes said. And then we keep our own record, she said, like we always have. She heard the distant thrum of the QRF helicopters. And Rahman, Hayes said. That was the part that stayed with her. That was the part that lived in the space between the operational facts and the thing she felt when she sat alone in Section C. She'd missed him. Not because she'd made a bad shot. Not because she'd been slow or wrong or unprepared. But because she'd been sent to a location where he wasn't by a process she couldn't yet prove had been corrupted, and he was still out there. He'll surface again, she said. They always do. She said it with more certainty than she felt. The QRF landed, and Vasquez was the first one off, and he came straight to her and looked at her face and then at Hayes and said, Both of you good? Good, she said. He nodded. He looked at the valley. He looked at the eastern position behind them. What happened out here? He said. She gave him the operational summary. Clean, sequential, factual. 8 to 10 enemy positions. Prepared ambush. Full engagement sequence. No friendly casualties. Target absent from designated location. Vasquez listened to all of it. Then he said, The intelligence on Rahman's position, how confident was Okafor? High confidence, she said. His words. Vasquez looked at the empty eastern position. High confidence, he repeated. He didn't say anything else about it. He was not a man who reached conclusions out loud. But she watched him reach it anyway privately, in the way that experienced soldiers reach things when the evidence speaks clearly enough. They extracted at 0430. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, that particular gray-blue that she'd seen every morning since she arrived and had stopped noticing, and was suddenly noticing again, because surviving something has a way of making you see things you'd stopped seeing. On the helicopter, Hayes sat across from her and didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and at some point she realized his hand was on the floor between them, palm up, not reaching for her, just open. Present. She looked at it for a moment. She put her hand over it once briefly. Then they both looked out at the mountains. The after-action briefing was at 0900. Brooks ran it. He ran it the way he always ran. Briefings flat, controlled, efficient. He acknowledged the enemy contact. He acknowledged the absence of the target. He described the intelligence as inconclusive given conditions, which was a phrase that meant nothing and was designed to mean nothing. When he got to the communications gap, he said, radio relay was complicated by terrain factors, within expected parameters for the operating environment. She kept her face still. When he got to her engagement summary, he read the numbers. 12 enemy positions, engaged, all confirmed, and then he moved on without comment. The same way he'd put 450 meters in the report when the real number was 780. The briefing ended. People filed out. Vasquez stopped next to her on the way out and said very quietly, I pulled the original radio test data on that valley, the one Okafor referenced 2 weeks ago. She looked at him. Brooks reviewed that data the day it came in, Vasquez said. She held very still. He signed off on the review, Vasquez said, so he definitely read it. Then Vasquez walked out. She stood in the empty briefing room for a moment. Hayes came back in. He'd waited in the doorway watching. Vasquez, he said. Brooks reviewed the comms gap data before the mission, she said. Personally, signed off on it. Hayes took that in. So he knew, Hayes said. He knew, she said. She picked up her notebook. Write it down, she said. Date time what Vasquez said exactly. Hayes had his pen out before she finished the sentence. They walked back across the compound together in the morning light, and somewhere behind them, The base was running its daily operations, and Farid Rahman was somewhere in those mountains, doing whatever men like Rahman did when they'd just watched an ambush fail, and Brooks was in the command post with his flat face and his calculations. And she was here, tired and intact and thinking. She'd survived the thing that was supposed to kill her. She hadn't gotten Rahman. Those two facts sat side by side in her mind, with the particular discomfort of things that don't resolve cleanly, that require time and patience and more information before they can be made sense of. She knew what she'd failed to do. She knew why. And she knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the same reading of evidence that told her where to put her crosshairs, that it wasn't over. Not with Rahman, not with Brooks. Both were still out there. Both were going to surface again. She thought about what her father had told her once about the difference between a missed shot and a failed shot. A missed shot is when you did everything right and the wind shifted at the last second. A failed shot is when you made an error in judgment. Only one of those tells you something needs to change. She hadn't made an error in judgment. The wind had been shifted for her. She entered Section C and sat on her cot, and picked up the letter to Marcus that she'd written the night before, the one she'd said she'd send if she came back. She uncapped the pen. She added 3 words at the bottom. Still here. E. She sealed it and walked to the mail drop and put it in. Then she went back to Section C and cleaned her rifle. Every piece, every surface, every contact point. Because tomorrow there would be another mission. Because Farid Rahman was still in those mountains. Because the only answer she had, the only answer she'd ever had, was to keep doing the work. Keep doing it right and trust that truth, which was slow and stubborn, would eventually outlast everything that was trying to bury it. She worked until her hands stopped shaking. Then she started over from the beginning. The attack began at 0347. Not with a single shot. Not with a warning. With everything at once, mortars dropping on the eastern perimeter. Small arms fire erupting from 3 valley approaches simultaneously. And the particular sound that every soldier in that outpost had been trained to recognize and dreaded recognizing, the low rhythmic thud of heavy machine guns finding their range. Evelyn was already awake. She'd been awake for 40 minutes, sitting on her cot in Section C, with her rifle across her knees and her data book open to a blank page she hadn't written anything on yet, turning over the evidence the way she'd been turning it over for 3 days since the Valley ambush. The comms gap. The signed review. Vasquez's quiet words in the briefing room doorway. The intelligence that was too specific to be accidental and too wrong to be honest. When the first mortar hit, she was already moving. She had her boots on before the echo finished. Hayes was outside when she cleared the door, and he looked at her with the expression she'd come to recognize as his version of controlled urgency. Everything accelerated internally, nothing wasted externally. 3 approaches, he said. East, southeast, and north. Someone's been watching our patrol patterns. Numbers, she said. Radio traffic is... He stopped. Radio's down. She looked at him. Main comms array took the first mortar, he said. We're on handheld only. Range is maybe 800 meters in these valleys. She understood immediately what that meant. No air support coordination. No battalion-level QRF. No artillery relay. Whatever was going to happen in the next several hours was going to happen with what was inside this perimeter and nothing else. Where's the highest observation point? She said. OP Kilo, northeast corner, gets you line of sight on all 3 approach valleys. How do we get there? Across open ground for 60 meters, then the access ladder on the north wall. 60 meters of open ground with mortars still falling. She ran the calculation. Mortars on a fixed outpost pattern adjusting every 3 to 4 rounds. If she timed the gap, when's the next adjustment cycle? She said. Hayes had been counting. She knew because he was always counting when things were falling. 20 seconds, he said. Then we go in 15, she said. Move. They ran. The mortar hit where they'd been standing 4 seconds after they cleared the position. She didn't look back at it. She kept running 60 meters of ground that felt like 600, and Hayes was right behind her, and then the north wall was in front of them, and she was on the ladder and climbing before her breathing had time to register how fast her heart was moving. OP Kilo was a sandbagged platform 8 meters up the north wall, open on 3 sides with a 360 view that on a clear day gave you 15 kilometers of valley in every direction, and on a combat morning gave you everything you needed to understand how bad the situation was. She understood immediately. It was very bad. "How many?" Hayes said, arriving behind her binoculars already up. She was already on the glass. "I can count at least 40 in the eastern approach," she said. "Southeast is there's a vehicle. They have a vehicle in the southeast. Technicals." "Armed truck," Hayes confirmed. "I see it. North approach is infantry, coming through the stream bed." The math was not good. One outpost standard complement defending 3 simultaneous approach vectors against what her count was suggesting might be close to 200 personnel. The perimeter wall would slow them. It wouldn't stop them. Not without firepower being applied to the approaches, not without someone suppressing the advance before it reached effective range for assault. She settled the rifle. "Call them," she said. "Everything you see. Don't filter it. Give me all of it." Hayes started talking. She started shooting. The first engagement was the vehicle. She put 2 rounds through the engine block at 420 meters and felt the familiar nothing that happened inside her when she was fully inside the work. Not cold, not detached, but present in a way that was almost outside emotion, purely functional, the way her father had described it once as the difference between thinking about swimming and swimming. You couldn't do both at once. The vehicle stopped moving. The men around it scattered. "North approach front element, they have a PKM setting up at the stream bed crossing," Hayes said. She swung north, found it, fired. "East approach, the element on the left flank is moving faster than the center. They're trying to get angle on the medical tent." She shifted east, calculated the advance. Put 2 rounds into the leading edge of the left flank, and the advance staggered. Not stopped. Staggered. It bought the defenders on the east wall 40 seconds to reinforce. 40 seconds mattered. "Hayes," she said, "get on the radio. I need someone in command authority to know we're up here and what we're seeing." "Vasquez is the senior officer on the east wall," Hayes said, already keying the handheld. "Brooks is—" He paused. "I don't know where Brooks is." She filed that information without reacting to it. "Get Vasquez," she said. Hayes got Vasquez. The next 90 minutes were the most sustained period of shooting she had ever done in her life. Not the most dangerous. The valley ambush had been more immediately lethal, the margins thinner, the escape routes more contingent. But this was duration. This was endurance. This was her body and her mind staying inside a state of absolute functional precision while the outpost around her took mortar fire and small arms fire, and the sounds of men in serious trouble filtered up to OP Kilo from every direction. She tracked everything Hayes told her. She shot the things that needed shooting. The medical tent came under direct threat 3 times. She broke each advance before it reached effective range. Fuel storage took a near miss from an RPG, and she caught the man with the launcher at the moment he was reloading and put a round into the position at 510 meters, and he didn't reload again. A helicopter medevac tried to approach at the 90-minute mark. A bird with a wounded pilot diverted from another operation trying to make an emergency landing in the outpost's designated zone. The southeast approach had repositioned 2 machine guns to cover the landing zone. She'd seen them move. She'd been tracking them for 20 minutes waiting for exactly this. She took both positions inside 6 seconds. The helicopter landed. Hayes had his hand on her shoulder briefly. Just briefly. She didn't look at him. She was already back on the glass scanning, because the thing about a sustained engagement was that the moment you looked away from the field was the moment the field changed. "Vasquez says confirmed kills on your positions are at 63, Hayes said. "His count." She didn't respond to the number. Numbers were for the log. Right now the log didn't matter. Right now only the next position mattered. "North approach is regrouping," Hayes said. "They pulled back 200 meters. Could be preparing a second push." "Or waiting for us to think they're done," she said. Yeah, Hayes said. That's what I think too. She kept the glass on the north stream bed. 90 seconds, 2 minutes. There, Hayes said. She'd already found it. A new element coming from a different angle, using the earlier advance as a diversion to mask the true push. They'd shifted their axis 30 degrees west, trying to hit the wall where the defenders were thinnest. She was already there. She and Hayes didn't speak for the next 8 minutes. They didn't need to. The rhythm of it had been established across weeks of working together, and what they were doing right now was simply that rhythm at its highest intensity. Hayes giving her information, she converting it to action. Both of them calibrated to each other in a way that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with the accumulated weight of everything they'd been through together. The north wall held. Then the radio crackled. Then Vasquez's voice, tight and very controlled, said, "Hayes, we have a situation at the south perimeter. Internal." She heard the word internal and felt something shift in her chest. "Say again," Hayes said. "South perimeter. Inside the wall." A pause. "I need you to tell Carter to be very careful." She turned to Hayes. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Something had arrived in his face that wasn't tactical, it was personal, the kind of alertness that comes from a threat changing its shape. "What's at the south perimeter?" she said. Hayes relayed it. Vasquez's voice came back clipped and direct. "Brooks." She went very still. "Say again," Hayes said. "Master Sergeant Brooks is at the south perimeter. He's been observed." Vasquez's voice dropped slightly. "He's moving toward OP Kilo, armed. He told Private Reyes he was coming to relieve Carter. Reyes thought it seemed wrong and radioed me." Hayes looked at her. She looked at the access ladder. 8 meters below them. The only way up. The only way down. The engagement outside the walls was ongoing. She could hear it. She could feel it in the structure of the platform under her feet. There were still men out there who needed to be stopped. There was still a field that needed covering. And somewhere below her, Daniel Brooks was climbing toward them. "How long ago?" she said. Hayes relayed it. 2 minutes, Vasquez said. "Maybe less." She made a decision. "Hayes," she said, "I need you to go down." He stared at her. "What?" "I need you down there. I can't call what's happening on this field and watch the ladder at the same time." She met his eyes. "Go down, take the radio, keep calling positions. If he tries to come up, Evelyn, if he comes up here, then I'll deal with it," she said. "But I need the field covered and I need that ladder covered and I can't do both. You can do one and I'll do the other." Hayes looked at her for one long second. The thing in his face was complicated. She saw every piece of it, the resistance, the fear that wasn't about himself, the calculation of what was right, the trust that had been built, one engagement at a time, over weeks of doing serious things together. He went down the ladder. She turned back to the field. Her breathing was even. Her hands were steady. She found the north approach and tracked a new element that had pressed forward while her attention was divided, and she put 2 rounds into the lead position and the advance stopped. Behind her, the platform vibrated slightly. Someone on the ladder. She kept her eye on the glass. North approach secondary element flanking right. She tracked the movement, calculated, held. The vibration continued, getting closer. She fired twice. The right flank stopped moving. The vibration stopped. Then from below the lip of the platform, she heard Brooks's voice. "Carter." Flat. Controlled. The same voice from every briefing, every evaluation, every carefully neutral performance of a man who'd been calculating for months. "We're rotating you out. Come down." She kept her eye on the glass. "The field is active," she said. "I can't step off." "That's not a request." "I know," she said. "And I'm not stepping off while there's an active engagement. You can file another incident report." A silence. She tracked a machine gun position on the southeast that had been quiet for 12 minutes and was repositioning. She waited. "The situation is under control," Brooks said. Ground elements have it contained. You're done up here. Vasquez's last count was 140 confirmed enemy on 3 approaches, she said. That's not contained. The machine gun crew finished repositioning. She had the new angle. She fired. Carter. His voice was different now. The neutrality was still there, but there was something underneath it that she hadn't heard before, something with a different quality. Last chance. Come down now. She cycled the bolt. I'm not coming down, Sergeant, she said. And then Hayes's voice came through the radio she'd left on the sandbag beside her, not relaying a position, not calling wind, just his voice low and absolutely certain. Vasquez has him, Hayes said. Don't come down. Stay on the field. She didn't process that immediately because there was a mortar team at the east approach that had found a new position, and she was tracking them and had 3 seconds before they got their tube aligned. She put 2 rounds into the position from 460 meters, and the tube went quiet. Then she processed what Hayes had said. Say again, she said into the radio. Vasquez came around the south perimeter. Hayes's voice was still low, still controlled, but there was something in it that came through the static clearly. He saw Brooks at the base of the ladder. Brooks had his sidearm drawn Evelyn. Not raised. Drawn. She pressed her jaw together and held that. Vasquez ordered him to stand down, Hayes said. He didn't stand down immediately. Dobbins and 2 others were with Vasquez. A pause. Brooks is in custody. She held the rifle. She kept her eye on the glass. Below her on the outpost she'd been protecting for going on 3 hours, Daniel Brooks, who had filed the reports, placed her in Section C, loosened her scope, erased her data, put her on the wrong side of ridgelines, leaked a mission to an enemy who built an ambush around it, and come up a ladder with a drawn sidearm while she was covering a perimeter against 200 attackers. Daniel Brooks was in custody. She breathed. She found the next position on the field and kept working. The attack broke at 0611. Not all at once. Never all at once. It came apart in sections, the way sustained attacks come apart when the offensive momentum runs out. First, the north approach, which had been taking the heaviest fire all morning, pulled back past the stream bed and didn't come again. Then the southeast, the vehicle now cold and useless in the approach road, the remaining elements moving in a dispersal pattern that meant retreat, not regrouping. Last was the eastern approach, the largest and most organized, and it held longest pressing against the east wall through 3 separate push attempts before finally fragmenting in the face of sustained defensive fire and Evelyn's work from OP Kilo. By 0623, the outpost was quiet. Not peaceful, not safe. Quiet in the way things are quiet after something large has happened, when the ringing fades and the ears start working again, and the world reassembles itself from the pieces the last several hours left scattered. She stayed on the glass for 12 more minutes. Then she lowered the rifle. Her neck ached. Her right shoulder had a deep, specific tiredness in it that she knew from experience would become a real problem by tomorrow. Her eyes were dry from hours behind the scope in mountain air. She became aware of all of this in the way you become aware of the cold after you've stopped running all at once, like someone had just turned it on. Hayes came up the ladder. He didn't say anything immediately. He climbed up and stood beside her and looked at the field, and she let him look and didn't speak because there was nothing to say, yet that wasn't going to take more words than she had right now. Finally he said, "Vasquez's count is at 215. She nodded. "Friendly casualties," she said. 7 wounded, none critical." He paused. "Nobody died, Evelyn." She closed her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Then she opened them and looked at the field. "Brooks," she said. "Under guard in the command post. Vasquez has formally assumed operational command pending investigation. He radioed up the chain at 0615 by 0620. There was a colonel on the line from Bagram who was not happy." Hayes paused again. "The colonel asked specifically about your status." "What did Vasquez tell him?" "That you'd been on OP Kilo for approximately 3 hours, covering the perimeter, and that your confirmed engagement count was the primary reason the outpost was still standing. She looked at the field. "And what did the colonel say?" she said. Hayes almost smiled. She could hear it in his voice, even though she wasn't looking at him. "He said, 'Get her off that platform and get her some food,'" Hayes said. She looked down at the rifle in her hands. "I need to do a barrel check first," she said. "Of course you do," Hayes said. She ran the check. The barrel was hot. It would need attention. She noted the round count in her head. She'd been keeping it throughout, because that was what you did. You always knew your round count, and then she carefully, methodically cleared the weapon, and safed it, and cased it. And then she stood up and stretched her back, and felt every hour of the last 3.5 in every vertebra. She climbed down the ladder. On the ground, Vasquez was waiting. He looked at her the way men look at something they've just watched, do something they didn't know was possible, with the particular alertness of someone whose understanding of a thing has just permanently changed. "You need to eat," he said. "I know," she said. "And sleep." After the after-action. "Carter, after the after-action," she said again, and her voice was gentle, but there was nothing negotiable in it, because the after-action was where the record got made, and the record was what mattered now, and she was not going to sleep before the record was correct. Vasquez looked at her for a moment. "After the after-action," he agreed. Dobbins was standing behind Vasquez, and when Evelyn met his eyes, he did something she hadn't seen him do in all the weeks she'd been here. He nodded. Not a greeting nod. The other kind. The kind that is a complete statement that contains more than it looks like. She nodded back. She understood what he was saying. She walked to the command post. The after-action took 2 hours. Vasquez ran it because Vasquez was now in command, and he ran it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that everything in this room was going to matter later. Every number, every timeline, every decision, and its documentation. He asked specific questions. He got specific answers. He recorded everything. When they got to Brooks, Vasquez asked her directly, "At what point did you become aware of Master Sergeant Brooks' presence at the base of OP Kilo?" "When Corporal Hayes relayed the radio communication from you," she said. Approximately, she gave the time from memory. "And his sidearm was drawn when Sergeant Vasquez and accompanying soldiers arrived at the base of the ladder," Vasquez said. Not a question, recording it. "That's Vasquez's direct observation," she said. "I was on the platform. I didn't see it." "Hayes observed it," Vasquez said. "Hayes can speak to what he observed," she said. Vasquez nodded. Writing. She was careful because she was always careful. Because the truth didn't need embellishment and didn't benefit from it. Because she'd learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you could do with evidence was present it exactly as it was and let it do its own work. After the after-action, she went to the mess and ate something she didn't taste and drank 2 cups of coffee that were too hot and didn't care. And Hayes sat across from her, not talking, which was exactly right. Then she went to Section C. She sat on her cot. On the shelf above the cot, her data book was where it always was. The incident report Brooks had filed on her first week was still folded in half on the shelf next to it, where she'd put it, and left it a record of a specific attempt to diminish something real. She looked at it for a moment. Then she got out a piece of paper and started writing to Marcus. She wrote, "Something happened today. I can't tell you all of it, but I want you to know I'm fine. I want you to know that the thing Dad always said about truth being stubborn turned out to be true in a way I didn't expect, and I think he knew it would, and I think he told me because he wanted me to have it when I needed it, which was today." She stopped writing. She thought about Brooks, about the fact that a man she'd known for months, a man who wore the same uniform she wore and was supposed to be working toward the same thing, had climbed a ladder with a drawn weapon while she was protecting his soldiers. She thought about that and let herself feel it fully for a moment, because she'd been putting that feeling in a compartment since Hayes said it through the radio static, and the compartment was getting heavy. Then she let it go, not because it didn't matter, because it was now in someone else's hands. Because Vasquez had it, and the colonel in Bagram had it, and the after-action report had it, and Hayes's log had it, and the testimony of Dobbins, and the two soldiers who'd been with Vasquez at the base of that ladder had it. She'd done what she could do. She'd built the record of truth one careful, accurate entry at a time across the weeks of this assignment. And today, the record had done what her father promised it would do. It had outlasted the thing trying to bury it. She finished the letter. "I love you, Marcus. Tell the horses in the mountains I said hello. I'll be home eventually. Don't let Dad's tools rust." She sealed it. She lay back on the cot. She was asleep in 40 seconds. She dreamed about Montana. Not about anything specific, just the quality of it, the particular weight of that air, the way the mountains. There were different from these mountains, older, somehow more settled, like they'd already decided what they were going to be, and were comfortable with the decision. In the dream, she was walking through open ground, with a rifle she wasn't carrying for any particular purpose. Just carrying it the way you carry something that's been yours long enough to feel like a part of you. And the light was the late afternoon light of September, and everything was very still. She woke up at 1847. Hayes was sitting on the ammunition crate outside her door. She came out and looked at him, and he looked at her. And there was a question in his expression that she answered by sitting down on the ground beside the crate and not saying anything for a moment. "How long have you been sitting there?" she said. "A while," he said. "Why?" He thought about it. "I don't know exactly. After everything today, it seemed like the right place to be." She looked at the compound. The damage from the morning was visible everywhere. The marks on the east wall. The debris from mortar impacts the organized activity of soldiers doing the specific kind of cleanup that follows a sustained attack. But they were moving. They were working. They were all still here. 215, she said. "That's Vasquez's count," Hayes said. "Mine's 218. "You've been keeping a separate count." "I always keep a separate count," he said. "You told me to keep logs." She looked at him. "I meant engagement logs," she said. "I know what you meant," he said. "I kept that too." She almost laughed. It was close enough that she recognized it. "What happens to Brooks?" she said. "Article 32, hearing minimum," Hayes said. "Vasquez thinks it goes higher. The colonel called back at 1400. There's a JAG team coming in from Bagram tomorrow morning." He paused. "And there's an inquiry being opened into the Rahman mission. The intelligence source, the comms gap, the signed review." She was quiet. "They're going to find what we know," she said. "Probably," Hayes said. "The signed review is on paper. That doesn't go away." She nodded. She looked at the east wall, at the marks the morning had left on it. "Farid Rahman is still out there," she said. "Yes," Hayes said. "He'll move again. If he thinks today's attack worked, if he doesn't know the outcome, he'll get comfortable. He'll move through familiar territory." "You're already thinking about the next one," Hayes said. "I never stopped thinking about the next one," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what Reyes told me, the private who radioed Vasquez when he saw Brooks heading for the ladder?" "What?" "He said he radioed because he'd been watching you work all morning. From his position on the south wall between his own engagements, he'd been watching OP Kilo, watching your muzzle flash, counting." Hayes paused. He said, "When I saw Brooks going up that ladder, I knew something was wrong. Not because of Brooks specifically, because I knew what was up there, and I knew it needed protecting." She was very still for a moment. A private on a wall in the middle of an assault, taking a second from his own survival to make a radio call, because he'd decided something needed protecting. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. "Get me Reyes's full name for the log," she said. "Already have it," Hayes said. The night came down cold and clear over the mountains, the way nights here always did. Absolutely, completely, without negotiation. Stars came out in the numbers that only happened at altitude, more than seemed possible, more than the eye could process. She sat outside Section C for a while longer. She thought about the morning. About 3.5 hours on a platform with a rifle and a spotter and the simple, brutal clarity of a situation that required everything she had and got it. She thought about what it felt like to do the one thing you were built for at the exact moment it needed to be done. She thought about Brooks on that ladder. She thought about Reyes on that wall. She thought about her father in the deer, blind his hand on her shoulder, his voice patient and certain in the dark. The land doesn't care how fast you are. It only cares how smart you are. She was smart enough. She had been smart enough when it mattered. Tomorrow the JAG team would arrive from Bagram. And somewhere in the eastern mountains, Farid Rahman didn't know yet that everything was about to change. She went inside. She cleaned her rifle. Then she opened her data book to a fresh page and began to write. The JAG team arrived at 0900 the next morning. 3 officers, 2 investigators, 1 colonel named Whitfield, who had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who've spent careers listening to things nobody wanted to say out loud. They landed in a helicopter that kicked up the usual dust and noise, and they moved through the outpost with the efficiency of people who had a job to do and intended to do it before lunch. Evelyn watched them from the north wall where she was running her morning equipment check, and she felt something loosen slightly in her chest. Not relief exactly, not yet, because relief required an outcome, and the outcome wasn't here yet. Something more like the feeling of having carried a weight a very long distance and finally being able to set it down temporarily while someone else checked the load. Hayes came and stood beside her. "Whitfield requested your full log first," he said. "I know, I sent it at 0730. He looked at her. "You were up at 0730. "I was up at 0530, she said. "I had a lot to organize." He shook his head, not in frustration, but in the particular way he'd developed over weeks of working with her, the headshake that meant, of course, you were in the most affectionate version of those words. "They're also requesting Vasquez's independent log," Hayes said. "And mine." "Good. And the radio test data that Vasquez pulled, the one Brooks signed off on." She nodded. She kept running the equipment check. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence scope mounts bolt receiver barrel, and her mind was in 2 places at once, which she'd gotten good at in a different way than she'd expected when she arrived here. Not the tactical split attention of an engagement where everything was immediate and physical, the deeper split of someone managing the present and the weight of everything that had led to it simultaneously. "Evelyn," Hayes said. She looked at him. "How are you actually doing?" he said. She thought about the honest answer, the real one, not the operational one. "I'm tired," she said, "in a way that sleep doesn't fix." She looked back at the equipment. "And I keep thinking about the letters I wrote to Marcus, the things I said in them versus what was actually happening. I kept telling him things were fine." "Were you lying to him?" Hayes said. "No," she said slowly. "I was editing. I was giving him the version that would let him sleep." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if that was the right thing to do." "What would you tell him now if you wrote it today?" She thought about that seriously. "I'd tell him it was harder than I expected, and better than I expected at the same time," she said. "I'd tell him that the hardest part wasn't the enemy. And I'd tell him I found out what I'm made of out here, which is something I already knew, but now I know it differently, in a way that doesn't come out of you again." Hayes was quiet. Then he said, "That's a good letter." "Yeah," she said. "I'll write it when this is done." She finished the equipment check, cased the rifle, turned to face the compound. The JAG team was already in the command post with Vasquez. Brooks was in a secured room on the south side of the base, guarded waiting. She hadn't seen him since the night before when she'd come down the ladder and Vasquez had told her he was in custody. She hadn't looked for him. There was nothing she needed to see. What she needed was to stay out of the way and let the process work. So she went to the medical bay. She hadn't been to the medical bay before, not as a visitor. She'd passed it 100 times, registered it the way you register every fixed point in a space you live in, noted the location and the entry point and the sight lines, the way she noted everything. But she hadn't gone inside. The medic on duty was a staff sergeant named Kowalski, mid-30s, with the particular competent efficiency of someone who'd been doing trauma care in difficult places long enough that nothing surprised him anymore, but he still cared about every case. He looked up when she came in with mild surprise that settled quickly into something else. "Carter," he said. You need something? Not medically, she said. I wanted to check on the wounded from yesterday. He looked at her for a moment. 7 wounded, she said. From the assault. I covered the perimeter, but I didn't know individual outcomes. I want to know they're okay. Something shifted in Kowalski's face. Not much, just slightly. 5 are stable and will stay here through recovery, he said. 2 were medevaced to Bagram this morning, both expected to make full recoveries. Reyes has a through and through in the left shoulder that's going to hurt for 6 weeks and feel fine after. Reyes, she said. Private Reyes, South Wall. You know him. He made a radio call yesterday that mattered, she said. Kowalski nodded. He understood what she wasn't fully saying because in small outposts in active combat zones, everyone eventually understands what everyone isn't fully saying. He's awake, Kowalski said. End bay. She walked to the end bay. Reyes was 23 years old and looked younger than that against the pillow with the particular pale quality of someone who'd lost blood and gotten it back artificially, and was still reconciling the difference. He had dark eyes and a jaw that was still trying to decide whether to hold steady or tremble. And when he saw Evelyn, he did something she didn't expect. He tried to sit up. Don't, she said. He stopped. She pulled the chair from the wall and sat next to the bed and looked at him. Kowalski says you're going to be fine, she said. Yes, Sergeant, he said. Hayes told me what you did, she said. The radio call. His jaw did the thing it had been deciding about and settled finally on steady. It seemed like the right thing, he said. It was the right thing, she said. It was exactly the right thing. He was quiet for a moment. I was watching you all morning, he said. From the south wall. Between my engagements, I kept looking at OP Kilo, watching the muzzle flash. He paused. I've never seen anything like it. Counting positions, moving fire, covering 3 approaches simultaneously. I didn't know a person could... He stopped. You did your job yesterday too, she said. Don't minimize that. I got shot, he said. You got shot and you kept fighting and you made a radio call that needed making, she said. All 3 of those things matter. He looked at her with the wide, serious eyes of someone very young who is trying to fit something large into the space they have available. Can I ask you something, Sergeant? He said. Yes. Were you scared up there? She held his question with the respect it deserved. Yes, she said. Not of the field, of not being enough, of something happening to one of you because I didn't see it fast enough or move fast enough or... Yes. I was scared of that the whole time. He was quiet. You were enough, he said. She stood up. She looked at him for a moment, this 23-year-old with a hole in his shoulder who'd made one right decision in the middle of chaos and didn't know yet how much it mattered. Get some sleep, she said. Kowalski will take care of you. She walked out. In the corridor, she stopped and pressed her back against the wall, and breathed for a moment because Reyes had said something true in the simplest possible words, and she needed a second with it before she went back out into the operational world. You were enough. She breathed it in. Then she went back outside. Whitfield found her at 1400. He came across the compound with the unhurried stride of someone who moved at his own pace, regardless of what was happening around him. And he stopped in front of her and looked at her with the listening quality eyes and said, Walk with me. They walked to the north wall. He didn't start immediately. He looked at the mountains the way people look at things they're using to organize their thoughts. Your log is comprehensive, he said. Thank you, she said. The scope incident, the data card, the incident reports, the coordinates on the Rahman mission. He paused. The signed radio test review. Yes, she said. You documented everything as it happened, he said. Not after the fact. The timestamps hold up. I learned from my father to write things down when they happen, she said. He said memory is honest, but it's not precise. Paper is both. Whitfield looked at her. Your father sounds like a smart man, he said. He was, she said. A pause. Brooks is cooperating, Whitfield said. More than we expected. He was quiet for a moment. The Rahman mission. The communications gap. He's confirmed the leak. She kept her face still. He confirmed it, she said. He confirmed he passed operational parameters through an unsecured channel the night before the mission, Whitfield said. He says it wasn't intentional. He says he was using the channel for a different purpose, and the information was inadvertently transmitted. She looked at the mountains. Do you believe that? She said. It's not my job to believe things, Whitfield said. It's my job to establish facts. The fact is that the information was transmitted. The fact is that the enemy had it. The fact is that you and Hayes walked into a prepared ambush. He paused. The intent question is for a hearing. She nodded. And the latter, she said. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. 3 witnesses, he said. Vasquez Dobbins and Private First Class Almeida. All 3 confirm the sidearm was drawn. Brooks's account is that he drew it as a precautionary measure given the ongoing assault. That the intent was protective. She said nothing. You were on the platform, Whitfield said. Not a witness. No, she said. He looked at her steadily. Is there anything you want to say about it off the record? She thought about it. The field was active, she said. I was covering 3 approach vectors and tracking multiple positions. A relief rotation during an active sustained assault via a single access platform announced by radio to my spotter, who then relayed it to me, was not standard procedure. It created a vulnerability in the coverage. She paused. That's on the record. Whitfield almost smiled. Noted, he said. He started to turn, then stopped. Carter, he said. For what it's worth, the engagement count from yesterday's assault. 215 confirmed, possibly higher. In a defensive action of that duration, from a fixed elevated position, 1 shooter. He stopped. I've been doing this for 22 years. I don't have a comparison point for that. He walked away. She watched him go. Then she looked at the mountains and thought about her father. Truth is slow, but it's stubborn, he'd said. It'll outlast almost everything. It had outlasted Brooks. She turned and walked back across the compound to find Hayes. The intelligence on Farid Rahman came in 4 days later. Okafor brought it to her directly, which was new. He'd always gone through the command chain before, always deferred to the structure, even when the structure was working against her. He came to find her personally, which told her something about how the last 4 days had changed the invisible architecture of this place. He's moving, Okafor said. New intelligence, different source confidence level, independent of the previous assessment. Where? She said. Village of Kaz Kunar. He's been there 2 days. He's moving a... Okafor hesitated. He's moving a civilian hostage. Aid worker, NGO. Female, early 30s. Name withheld pending family notification. Evelyn went very still. He's using her as a transit document, Okafor said quietly. Moving through the village with her present makes him harder to engage, harder to track without civilian risk. She understood the calculation. Rahman had been doing this long enough to know exactly how the American military thought. He knew the rules of engagement. He knew the weight that civilian presence placed on every decision. He was using a human life as a shield and a passport simultaneously. Timeline, she said. He moves through the village center tomorrow morning between 0800 and 0900. After that, he's into the eastern passes and we lose him again, possibly for months. She looked at Okafor. What's Vasquez's read? She said. Vasquez says it's your call, Okafor said. His words exactly. She stood with that for a moment. Your call. From a man who'd been in operational command for 4 days and could have taken this in any direction, who could have run it up the chain and let it become someone else's decision. He was giving it to her. Not because he was avoiding responsibility, because he trusted her judgment more than he trusted the chain that had almost gotten her killed. I need Hayes, she said, and I need to see the village layout. I have both, Okafor said. They planned through the night. The village of Kaz-Kunar sat in a valley approach that Evelyn had covered twice before in different contexts from different positions. She knew the general topography. She didn't know the specific structure layout which Okafor's maps gave her, or the specific pattern of civilian movement through the market area at 800, which his human intelligence gave her. She and Hayes sat with the maps and the intelligence and worked through every angle. The problem was direct and severe. Rahman would be moving through a populated area with a hostage in proximity. Any shot that wasn't exactly right distance angle timing the specific window when Rahman was separated from the hostage by sufficient margin was not a shot she could take. Not because of the rules of engagement, though those existed. Because she would not take it. The window is maybe 3 seconds, Hayes said. He'd been running the geometry for an hour. When he crosses from the market building to the vehicle, there's a gap in the route where the hostage is behind him. The angle from the North Ridgeline is tight, but possible. Distance, she said. 740, maybe 750. She thought about the day she'd arrived. The first mission. 780 meters on a moving target in mountain air, a shot everyone called luck. She knew what it was. Wind in that valley at 0800, she said. Variable, Hayes said. Morning thermals coming off the ridge. Could be 2 miles an hour, could be 6. It's going to shift. Then I adjust in real time, she said. For a 3-second window, Hayes said. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Okay, he said. Then we go at 0400. I want us in position by 0630. She nodded. She went to Section C. She didn't write a letter to Marcus. There wasn't anything to say yet. She lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling and went through the shot. In her mind, not nervously, not with anxiety, but the way she always prepared, the way her father had taught her, walking through the geometry in the space behind her eyes, until it was familiar enough to become physical, until her body knew the shape of what she was going to ask it to do. She thought about the hostage, early 30s, female, aid worker, someone who'd come to this country to do something useful and had been turned into a tactical instrument by a man who understood exactly what she was worth to him. Evelyn thought about her for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and slept. They were in position at 0623. The North Ridgeline gave her a sight line across the valley to the village center that was clean and long and exactly what the maps had suggested. Hayes was set up a meter to her right with the spotting scope and the wind meter and the radio, and they'd established comms with Vasquez's support element before they went dark, a check-in protocol every 15 minutes until contact. They waited. She was good at waiting. She'd been good at it since she was 9. At 7:41, Hayes said very quietly. Movement at the east end of the market building. She found it. 3 men, armed, moving with the specific spacing of a personal security detail, not clustered, not random positioned. Security element, she said. Rahman follows the security element, Hayes said. That's his pattern according to Okafor. Hostage position. Should be with him, behind the security lead. She tracked the security element. They moved along the market frontage with the unhurried pace of people who believed they were protected by the civilian population around them. She tracked them and waited, and did not rush and did not anticipate because anticipation was how you missed. At 0754, Rahman appeared. She recognized him from the intelligence photographs. Taller than she'd expected, moving with a quality of assurance that belonged to men who had been untouchable for long enough that they'd stopped imagining the alternative. The hostage was beside him, left side close, Rahman's hand on her arm, not gripping, placed the way you place a thing you're using. Evelyn breathed. She tracked him across the market frontage. She tracked him through the calculation of distance and elevation and the wind. Meter data coming from Hayes in quiet numbers. She converted without thinking into adjustments that existed in her hands and her eye before they existed in any conscious decision. She tracked the gap. The 3-second window Hayes had mapped, between the market building exit and the vehicle. 12 meters of open ground. The hostage would fall behind by 2, maybe 3 steps, because the vehicle door was on the far side, and Rahman would move to it directly while the hostage was guided by the secondary security. She waited. The security lead reached the vehicle. Rahman cleared the market building exit. The hostage fell behind 1 step, 2 steps. Hayes said nothing. He didn't need to. He could see exactly what she was seeing. The wind meter in his hand. 2.4, he said. Barely above a breath. She was already there. The window opened. She fired. 1 round, 743 meters. Farid Rahman went down. The security element reacted immediately, weapons up, scanning, 2 of them moving to cover Rahman, the third grabbing the hostage and pulling her backward toward the market building. Evelyn tracked the hostage's position, covered behind the market wall, now out of the field. She cycled the bolt. She scanned for secondary threats. Nothing moved in her direction. The radio crackled. Vasquez's support element was moving. She heard it in the distant sound of vehicles and the change in the radio traffic. Hayes put his hand on her shoulder. She lowered the rifle. She breathed. "Confirmed," she said. Hayes had the spotting scope. "Confirmed," he said. His voice was steady, and something else at the same time, something that the steadiness was working to contain. She lay on the cold ground of the North Ridgeline for a moment, and felt the weight of everything in her body. 3.5 hours on OP Kilo, and the Valley ambush, and 8 weeks of this place, and the scope, and the data card, and Brooks on the ladder, and Reyes in the medical bay, and the letters to Marcus. She felt all of it at once, and she let herself feel it, and then she breathed it out. Farid Rahman. 219 kills total. Not the last number. Not the number that would define her. The one that mattered was the woman currently being extracted from behind the market wall by Vasquez's element. The one who was going to board an aircraft and go home to wherever she was from, and hug whoever she had there, and never know exactly what had made it possible. That number was 1. One woman who came home because the shot was right. Evelyn thought that was the only number that had ever actually mattered. She got the news about Brooks on the flight back to Bagram 2 weeks later. Vasquez told her himself the same direct, no preamble way he told her everything. Article 32 hearing concluded, he said. Charges recommended. Dereliction of duty conduct unbecoming deliberate endangerment. He paused. And the leaked transmission. They're calling it negligent disclosure of operational information. He's contesting the intent finding, but... Vasquez stopped. His career is over. Whatever else happens in the hearing. She sat with that. Not with satisfaction. With something quieter, the specific feeling of a long-running thing finally stopping. Like a sound you've been hearing so long, you stopped noticing it, and then it ends, and the silence is what tells you it was there. He confessed to the other things, she said. The sabotage, yes. On record. The scope, the data card, the coordinates. Vasquez looked at her. He said... He stopped. What? He said he didn't think you'd last, Vasquez said. He said he kept expecting you to give up, to request a transfer or break down, or make an error that justified removing you. He said... Vasquez paused again, and she could see him deciding how much to give her. He decided to give her all of it. He said when you didn't break, he panicked. His word, panicked, and the escalation started. She looked out the window of the aircraft at the mountains below. The peaks she'd looked at every morning for 8 weeks, the valleys she'd covered, the ridge lines. She knew the way, she knew the lines on her own hands. He was afraid, she said, not a question. Of you proving something, Vasquez said. I think that's the honest answer. She looked at the mountains for a long time. He proved it himself, she said. Everything he did to try to stop me proved exactly what he was afraid of. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's exactly right. Yet. Bagram was louder than Kunar, brighter with more people moving in more directions, and the constant background noise of a major installation. She moved through it with the mild disorientation of someone who'd been in a small, contained, high-intensity place for too long and was recalibrating to scale. Hayes stayed close, without making a production of it. On the second day, she was called to the base commander's office. A general named Torres, compact and direct, with the look of someone who'd spent 25 years deciding what mattered and discarding what didn't. He looked at her file when she came in. Then he looked at her, then he set the file down. 219 confirmed kills, he said. 8 weeks. Yes, sir, she said. Including the Raman engagement. Yes, sir. He looked at her steadily. The Kaz Kunar shot. 743 meters. Hostile-only impact. Hostage unharmed, extracted successfully. He paused. Walk me through the decision process. She did. Clean, sequential, factual. The intelligence. The window. The wind data. The timing. She gave him the same thing she gave every after-action report, exactly what happened in the order it happened, without embellishment or justification, because the facts didn't need either. When she finished, Torres was quiet for a moment. The Raman shot has been reviewed by 3 independent snipers, he said. All 3 said. He stopped. He looked at her with the particular expression of someone who is trying to find the right word for something that doesn't have an obvious one. All 3 said they weren't certain they would have taken it. The window, the wind variables, the civilian proximity, they said they weren't certain. She waited. They also said, Torres continued, that in their professional assessment it was the only shot available that didn't risk the hostage, which means not taking it also had a cost. Yes, sir, she said. Which is why you took it, he said. Yes, sir. He nodded. He closed the file. You're being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross, he said. The Raman engagement, OP Kilo, the Valley ambush. 3 separate actions being recognized. She kept her face still. And there's a secondary recommendation, Torres said. From Sergeant Vasquez. Written formal, submitted directly to my office. He looked at her. He recommends that your engagement log and mission documentation from the last 8 weeks be incorporated into Special Operations Sniper Training Curriculum as a case study in sustained operational effectiveness under hostile conditions. Torres paused. Including the hostile conditions inside the perimeter. She breathed. He doesn't have to do that, she said. No. Torres agreed. He doesn't. She sat with that for a moment. Vasquez, who had signed his name to a formal recommendation to put her experience into the curriculum, not because he was required to, not because a superior told him to, but because he'd decided it was right. Tell him thank you, she said. Tell him yourself, Torres said. He's waiting outside. She walked out. Vasquez was there in the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing it did when he was pretending he hadn't just done something significant. She looked at him. The curriculum thing, she said. It's a useful case study, he said. Training value. Nothing sentimental about it. Right, she said. The documentation is exceptional, he said. The log methodology alone. Vasquez, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he uncrossed his arms and stood up straight. Get home safe, Carter, he said. Take care of yourself. She nodded. She walked back to Hayes, who was waiting where she'd left him, sitting on a bench with his notebook open, still writing, still logging, because that was who he was. What did Torres say? Hayes said. DSC recommendation, she said, and Vasquez submitted the curriculum thing. Hayes looked up from the notebook. She met his eyes. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, Your father would know what to say right now. I'm just going to write it down. She almost laughed. She actually laughed. It came out of her clean and real, and she pressed her hand over her mouth briefly, and then let it be, because it was the first real laugh she'd had in 8 weeks, and it was okay that it happened here in a corridor in Bagram, next to the best spotter she'd ever worked with. Write it down, she said. Put today's date on it. He already had. She landed in Montana on a Thursday morning in December. The light was the particular flat white of winter, low and clear, and the mountains were exactly as she'd left them settled, certain older than anything around them. Marcus was at the airport with his jacket open despite the cold, because he'd always run warm because some things didn't change. He saw her and started walking toward her fast, and then they were in the specific kind of hug that only happens between people who've been through something together, even when one of them was on the other side of the world. He held on for a long time. She let him. "You're okay," he said. Not a question. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm tired, but I'm okay." He pulled back and looked at her face with the same eyes their father had, the same reading quality. "You look different," he said. "I am different," she said, "but not in a bad way." He nodded. He understood that. On the drive back to the ranch, he didn't ask about the numbers. He didn't ask about Brooks or Rahman or the assault or the shot at 743 meters. He talked about the horses, about a fence section that needed replacing, about the particular stubbornness of the winter this year. He let her come back at whatever speed she needed. She looked out the window at the Montana she'd been carrying in her letters for 8 weeks. "Tell the mountains I said hello." She'd written that. The mountains were here. They hadn't changed. She had. On the evening of the first day home, she went to her father's workshop, unchanged since he died. Everything exactly where he'd left it. His tools on the wall in the order he'd hung them. The smell of metal and oil, and the particular dusty warmth of a space someone had cared about. She stood in the middle of it for a long time. She thought about what she'd learned, about patience, which her father had told her was the most important skill, and she hadn't believed him for years. About the truth being stubborn. About the moment on OP Kilo when she'd understood fully that what she was doing was the only thing she'd been built for. She thought about Reyes saying you were enough from a hospital bed in Kunar province. She thought about 219 and about the number that mattered inside that number, which was the hostage who didn't know her name and was home right now, wherever home was. She thought about Hayes and his notebook, and his steadiness, and the way he'd put his hand palm up on the helicopter floor and not said anything. She went back inside. Marcus had made dinner. Something their mother used to make, something with too much pepper that they'd complained about as children, and that tasted exactly right now. They sat at the table their father had built. They ate. Outside, the Montana night came down cold and clear and full of stars. The same stars she'd looked at from a ridgeline in Kunar province and thought meant she was still alive. She was still alive. That wasn't nothing. That was in fact everything. Months later, when the official accounts were written, and the names were recorded, and the case studies entered the curriculum, people would talk about the 219. They would say the number like it was the story. They would cite the Rahman shot, the OP Kilo engagement, the Valley ambush. But the people who were there, Vasquez Hayes, Reyes Dobbins, Kowalski, all of them, they knew the number that mattered was not 219. It was the count of every soldier who walked back through a gate, every medevac that landed clean, every patrol that came home whole, because someone was in position who knew what she was doing and did it without hesitation and without fail. It was the aid worker who got on a plane and went home to people who loved her. It was the young private who made one right decision from a hospital bed 6 weeks later when someone asked him what a guardian angel looked like, and he said without hesitating, without needing to think about it, "She looks like someone who decided she was going to keep you alive." And then she did. Evelyn Carter put her rifle in storage in her father's workshop on the wall between his tools, exactly where things belonged when they'd done their work. She walked back to the house where Marcus was washing dishes, and the horses were in from the cold, and the mountains were standing where they'd always stood. She had kept her people alive, every single one of them. And that was who she was, and who she had always been, and no one who laughed at her on a landing pad in Kunar province in the autumn of 2012 would ever use the word luck again.